Well, good morning, everyone. Want to welcome you to our session today. Our panel is Organizational Responsibility, the Role of Upholding Human Dignity. In this session, we will reflect on how organizations can create structures for support, shared responsibility, and interdependence that upholds human dignity in the workplace and beyond. We're going to be joined by three incredible panelists who are uniquely qualified to speak to this very issue. However, before I introduce our panelists, I want to thank our conference sponsor, which is Open Society, and also want to say thank you to our event, our discussion sponsor today, which is Design Learning. Design Learning's vision is to create workplaces and communities that work for the common good of all through conversations, to consult, convene, and empower. The work is guided by a belief in an alternative narrative, which values individual choice, accountability, co-creation, and the power of invitation over mandates. Again, we want to thank our sponsor, Design Learning. Now, it is, I want to, Pam is going to be covering the chat for us today, where attendees are joining. So please put in the chat where you are joining from. We have folks from really around the world, so we want to see who's with us today for this session. And we'll run through several of the geographical locations posted in the chat. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We would like to encourage you to participate actively in the chat. When you chat, be sure to select all panelists and attendees. Remember that closed captioning is available in this session. If you choose to select it, please share your questions through the Q&A button so we can make sure not to miss any of them. We really hope you enjoy this session. All right. We have three wonderful panelists, and their excellent bios are provided on our webpage, but I'd like to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves before we get into our topic. Ladies, good morning. We've got Christy Lafferty, we've got Gabriela Wu, and Kathleen McGoey. So if we could start with Christy, give us one thing on your bio that you're very proud of, and then tell us, outside of your day job, one thing you like to do.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Wu and I are joining you all from Managua, Nicaragua, in Central America. It's so cool to see people chatting where they're from all over the world. So in my bio, something that I'm proud of, I would say, on one side, I've been working in the nonprofit sector for over 15 years. And I think for a lot of people, I'm sure on the call, have also had that experience. Not always an easy sector to work in, lots of challenges always, and really excited to share about kind of what AMOS is doing with restorative practices. But I'm also just going to say, I think not as much on a personal level, but I'm really proud to be a part of an organization that has very strong values, that we are trying to put those into practice. And I think restorative practices and finding ways to be a continuous learning organization, it's one of the ways that we try to take something abstract as values and on a daily try to live those out.
That is great. All right, Dr. Wu?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so excited of being here and share with you. One thing I'm very, very proud of being part of AMOS and me as a Nicaraguan physician is that I've been able to grow with the organization to transform communities. This has been a really unique opportunity for me, and I feel so blessed that I've been able to grow as an individual, but also being able to reduce health inequities in countries like Nicaragua that faces a lot of challenges. So that's one thing that I'm very, very proud.
Great. And last but not least, Kathleen, go ahead.
Good morning. So my name is Kathleen McGoey, and I'm joining you all from Longmont, Colorado, which is the land of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. And something that I'm proud of from my bio is in 2020, I co-authored the Little Book of Restorative Teaching Tools with Lindsay Pointer and Haley Farah. And it was published in March 2020. And we all know what happened in March 2020. So we had so much excitement about launching the book, and the book is all about experiential activities to help learn restorative skills in a restorative way. So we envisioned having these book launch parties where we would play these games with people in person and reach many new people who were new to restorative tools. And then we had to redirect, and we actually began offering new games online on our website that are available for free. And most of them are, you can engage with them online. So we wanted to adapt to the context that people were in. And so we continued releasing a new game or activity every month. And now we've just confirmed a contract to publish a second book, which will be something along the lines of the Little Book of Restorative Teaching Tools for online learning. So really excited to try to bridge that gap for folks that want to continue doing this work in a relational way, even if they're doing it in a virtual setting.
Awesome. Well, listen, first of all, thank you for sharing a little bit about each of you. So we're going to jump into our discussion this morning. I'm going to start with Kathleen. How would you describe the work environment you were engaged in prior to the introduction of restorative practice? What did you see or hear as people were interacting in the workplace?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'll just frame that I'll be offering perspective both from my experience having worked at a restorative justice nonprofit, Longmont Community Justice Partnership, or LCJP, here in Longmont, and also from the perspective of now being a trainer, facilitator, and working with organizations throughout the country that are seeking to implement a restorative workplace culture. So one, in Longmont, what I noticed before we were able to really put this restorative culture in place, that there was a misalignment between what we offered the community and what we offered each other in our internal workplace culture and relationships. So staff was training hundreds of community volunteers in restorative skills to address crime, but those same skills and tools were not consistently applied to address misunderstanding or conflict behind the scenes with each other. And at a certain point, my coworkers and I were noticing things like, two volunteers were paired up to facilitate a case, and one person was having a hard time reaching the other person to do some scheduling, and they'd get through it, and then at the end of the case we'd get a call, the staff would get a call with one person saying, it was really hard to work with so and so because they weren't returning my calls. And we thought, oh, this is not empowering, right? Like, people are perpetuating this behavior where when they have a problem they call somebody else for help, which is kind of how we're conditioned growing up. So there's an incongruence and a missed opportunity. So we thought, wouldn't it make sense and be so beneficial for all of us to be practicing restorative skills with each other? And then I'll just say, to answer that question within the context of other organizations that I work with, three things. One, people are experiencing real harm in the workplace and don't have the tools or protocol to address that harm in a way that enables real change and learning. And especially now, with identity-related incidents, people experiencing harmful or offensive comments related to race, gender, sexual orientation. What's beautiful to see is that many organizations are coming to me with a will and a desire to address those incidents, but they just don't know how yet. Two, people just don't know what to do when there's conflict, or they know what to do, and that is go tell somebody else, go tell a supervisor or go to human resources, or even harder to witness is people are miserable at work for the next 25 years because they're working next to somebody they've got serious beef with, and all they know to do is kind of grin and bear it. And third, people are experiencing burnout due to that incongruence. They say, we're really good at our programs. We like what we do, but we're not necessarily good to each other. There isn't psychological safety, and I can't be well here.
Thank you so much. I want to remind all of our guests that are viewing, as we're going through, you can be placing your questions in the Q&A. Please be sure to place them there, and you'll have an opportunity. We'll be pulling from those questions a little bit later on. All right. Gabriela, you want to take a shot at that? What did you see? What did you hear?
Yes, so I come from a completely different background. So I'm a physician. So before starting working in a nonprofit, I was working in a hospital. So what was like that? Yeah, something very similar to what Kathleen described, but also I will say that in this kind of setting, there was a high level of stress due to people didn't know how to deal with conflict. And it's so, in this kind of setting, it's so important to be able to express things in a healthy way, because otherwise you're not only going to be damaged the relationship between coworkers, but you can damage someone else, that in this case will be the patients. So I will say that. And then the other thing I can add is that there was little space for improvement because people didn't know how to express their needs, or that they were facing very stressful environment, that they didn't have the tools to do their job, or they didn't have the technology, etc. So they didn't have a space where they can express that. So there was little space for improvement. And that is something that changed when I came to the nonprofit. So I was just trying to do that contrast from that kind of setting. And then I will say that that kind of like lead the team to be or have like low productivity, that they were just doing the minimum and not trying to improve and have better outcomes, because they or in that environment, that you were afraid to express or to deal with conflict. Oh, no, let's not deal with conflict. That's not good. That will take us to a more negative environment. So that is kind of like, I think, the setting or the environment it was before I was introduced to restorative practice.
Okay. Christy, how about you?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to a lot of what Kathleen and Gabriela both mentioned, but I think maybe just adding a little bit to that avoidance of conflict, but the dynamics of power and authority and structures. So I had experiences both in a nonprofit in the US and here in Nicaragua of as I was in the like early stages of my career, seeing one dynamic of a very, very small staff and a very large board of a national organization, and kind of the dynamics between the executive director and the staff. And there was no ill will. There was no, kind of desire to cause harm to anyone, but just like a lack of spaces to be able to, express certain things, or a language or a methodology to be able to approach someone with a difficult issue, and try to not have it become something big, or that will cause something to come back on an employee, but rather how can we express something in a way that is going to be restorative. And I think also experiencing an organization that was going through a really difficult leadership transition from a period of like long time of a founder, and transitioning to a new leader, and some staff who had been from the earliest founding days of the organization, and then newer staff, and everyone had a commitment to the why, to the mission, but just this kind of dynamic of two different groups, and just like unhealthy competition that built up, and that nobody was they were only talking amongst themselves, and not being able to express it to each other as a whole. So I think those we're going to be getting into how now with restorative practices, but those are some issues that I think, like, now looking back, wow, if those spaces had restorative practices as a tool, there might have been some really different results.
Yeah, that feeds right into the next question. What did you anticipate would be different if you were able to actually implement a restorative framework? Christy, you want to start with that one, and we'll go back around? What did you think? What did you anticipate would be different if you were able to implement?
Yeah, no, I think like it's something that I have seen now at AMOS, but I think that restorative practices, when I was first introduced to the concept, just with our founders here, and Miguel Tello, who was our mentor, and he's an IIRP certified trainer, and has been a professor at the graduate school, but that there are different levels of using restorative practices. It's not just once you have a major conflict and you're going to have a circle or etc. That there's so many things that we can do that are preventative on a daily basis. And so I think just thinking about we have a natural tendency in our workplaces when we get to work in the morning, maybe we're with our close coworkers we sit next to, how are you? How was the weekend? How are you feeling? But there's also ways we can implement some restorative practices on a daily basis that are just checking in, that are having a space to, say, what, that thing last week, I felt really uncomfortable. Okay, tell me more. Let me get curious about that. So yeah, I think that's just one point, and I'll let other people share more.
Gabriela, you want to take a shot at that? What did you anticipate would be different if you were able to implement?
I think one thing will be space for innovation. That is one thing that I've seen, that restorative practices also give a space, not only on how to deal conflict, because obviously you will have that that opportunity, but also that takes you to a level of sharing, of being part of something that we are all working towards the same goal. So I think that will give an opportunity to innovation, to improve the organization, to not only to how to deal conflict, but also to prevent, I think, conflict, because you learn how to express your emotions, you learn how to express what are you feeling or dealing with. So in that way, you can also prevent conflict. And something else that I think it will be different is that you will now have a tool to use and with coworkers that are not fulfilling or assuming their responsibilities. So these restorative practices I have seen that helps you to deal with those kind of coworkers.
Yeah, great. Kathleen?
Yeah, thanks. I'm really appreciating everything that Christy and Gabriela have shared. And I would say things that we anticipated. One is that we would just see that people have agency, and people will, because of the language and methodology that Christy mentioned, people will have a little more courage to have a hard conversation, and that will help to unlearn some of the conditioning around go to someone who has more power than you and report the problem to them, and instead return that capacity and agency to the individuals involved to address things on their own. And, I mentioned before congruence and alignment, and not only did we envision that restorative practices internally would help bring that congruence and alignment, it would also become a really powerful empathy building experience. So when you actually sit in the seat of being a person harmed or a person who's caused harm, participating versus, say, facilitating, you learn what it's like to be in that position, to feel the feelings, experience a whole range of things: discomfort, shame, healing, and the courageous vulnerability that is required to even agree to be in that conversation. And having that direct and lived experience just vastly improves your skills as a restorative practitioner, as well as just impacting your experience of being a human being, having more perspective and more empathy for others. And then I would say some of the other things that I've witnessed with other organizations that I've worked with are, one, there's this common divide between the folks doing the programmatic work and the folks at an administrative or development managerial department, where there's misunderstanding often. Like, I don't really know what they do. I only hear from those people when they need my timesheet. What else do they do in that office? And so restorative practices and that proactive relationship building approach are able to bring those departments or those different offices together so that they can understand each other, not just what their job is, but also who they are. What excites them about this work, or what excites them about what they did on the weekend. And by kind of clearing up the assumptions or narratives that they've created about each other, there's more energy to actually go and do the work together. There's, less energy sort of leaking out into complaints or grievances, spending time saying, like, I wish things were different. I wish that, those people appreciated me, or whatever's coming up, and actually moving through that through connection.
That's great. So I wanted shift a little bit. We've gotten a couple of questions that have come in, and so we want to get real practical. The how-tos. So Gabriela, I'm going to come to you first. Can you share, how did you go about implementing? What was kind of the first thing you did? One of the questions that came in is, how would you start the circle with restorative practice with the community, meaning who to invite, what type of language would you use? So you want to give us your thoughts on that? What's the first step?
Yes, so we have implemented restorative practices in rural communities that we serve. So the first thing that we do is to look for a space that it's quiet, and that you can do the circle. But then the second thing, and I think that is one of our, it's part of our values as an organization. We develop relationship with the communities we serve, and it's that is due to this trust that we have developed over the years. So I think that is the first step that you have to do to implement restorative practice, to develop or to give space to trust that you're not going to be judged. So if you don't have that first, then the other things won't actually, people won't feel that they are safe and that they can express how they are feeling with or what they're dealing with. And yeah, so we have different examples of that. As a country, in 2018, we were facing social or political unrest, and it was a very social crisis, a very difficult social crisis, a very difficult context. And that is one of the first things that enable us to continue doing our work without that, without the context affecting us. It was trust.
Good. Christy, you want to weigh in on that? What did you find out? Go ahead.
I'm just going to build off of what, Dr. Wu was mentioning. What occurred in Nicaragua was a very historical, moment and turning point that's still being felt by people. But I think, when as a country, you see and witness violence, and you see and witness people, in the streets, and very visual, national level conflict. There's a sense of, for me, and I think for a lot of my coworkers, it was kind of feeling paralyzed. Like, we know we have a job to do, but everything that's happening around me is changing and kind of chaotic, and it goes against kind of what I thought the world and maybe humanity should behave as. And within that context, I think too, for Nicaragua's history, there was also a lot of people in some of the older generations reliving things that had happened, 30, 40 years before. And so that historical kind of trauma coming out. And the fact that as an organization, we had this base of restorative practices that over time, for me, one of the things that I'll definitely never forget, our founders, every time there was enough of a cohort, like a group of people who were newer staff coming into the organization, they would reach out to Miguel, Tello, and contact him and say, hey, when are you going to come and do another workshop on restorative practices on circles? We need to train our staff. And so the fact that it was a constant process, it was a constant, getting people comfortable and familiar with those kind of things. And so when we had this real crisis that wasn't, necessarily internal, but it was something very, very big externally that affected everyone, it was almost unnatural, but it was an immediate kind of thing that we could pull on as a tool and to say, okay, we're gonna stop, we're gonna pause and do something that brings all of our stuff together, break people down into circles, construct some really important questions, and just allow people to kind of process what was happening. Because, and I just really believe if we had not done that, I think we would have had just so much more of a challenge for people individually, personally. I mean, it's not like it disappeared, but we were able to get to enough of a point and really also, I think, just create enough of an understanding or bonds in a moment where not necessarily everybody agreed or thought the same thing, but we could still function. And that was really important at the time. So
that's perfect. Kathleen, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I do, but I'm so moved listening to Christy and Gabriela. Could you rephrase the question for me so I can add something from a different experience?
Yeah, actually, there's a question that came in and I think would help. So it says, we're in a RP school and I struggle with admin using their position and title to lessen the harm that was done? How can I begin a conversation with an assistant principal who continues to do harm and says, I'm your boss and you have to respect my position. I am telling you what to do. So how do you when we're implementing, there are, often challenges because restorative practice is, if it's, we talk about students that sometimes they will, kind of recoil a little bit because it's new to them. And the truth is, we're just going to keep this between us. The adults have just as much problem dealing with it as the kids do sometime, right? And this would be an example of it. So have you, because I know you work with different agencies and groups, have you encountered that type of challenge?
Yeah, across the board. I think it's common in schools, but it shows up in other organizations too, where someone in an administrative or leadership role says, yeah, this is a good idea for all of you to use these great things, but I'll just be here in my office, and you can tell me about how it's working out. And I want to validate how extremely frustrating that is, and also perpetuating of harm through that power dynamic. And in terms of trying to answer that question, I think there's always the continuing to use restorative principles to try to invite people to the table. So exploring, and I just want to acknowledge it's always going to be difficult when if I'm a teacher and I'm going to the assistant principal, I may need some allies and advocates to help me, because fear of retaliation is real, and fear of having some sort of mark against me because I'm challenging somebody in leadership or power position is very real. So I want to mention that first, that this isn't some easy, like, just knock on the door and call in this person and think, no problem, it's going to all work out smoothly. So that would be my first thought, is, around having an ally. And then I'm always curious about what are the values, goals, and objectives of that person who's maybe resistant to fully participating in a restorative practice, and what are the limiting factors, and also what are the things that they're drawn to that are important to them, and how can I offer an invitation that helps align with their values? So if they're really interested in, I don't know, maybe there's something around budget concerns, maybe their interest is around perception by the school board, or all of these other motivational factors. Is there a way that I could speak to what's important to that person, to ask them to take the first step into not a conversation where I'm immediately challenging them with the problems that I see, but instead trying to form some sort of connection and a first step towards safety in just even being in that honest, authentic type of conversation. Taking that small step before pushing too hard so that we don't push people away. Although I'm also going to acknowledge that sometimes there has to be a bigger step too, right? There's no one way of doing this. But I personally, my personal belief is that connection first, right? Building connection first so that we can have a place of trust to the greatest degree possible before we try to get into the thing that's going to understandably cause somebody to resist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember who initially made the statement, but said rules without relationship breeds rebellion, right? So focusing on cultivating the relationship is really, really, really important. So some other questions have come in about both measuring, if you can give an example of some success that you've seen, and how do you measure success? What do you use to gauge how you're measuring success? I'll open that up, whoever wants to take a shot at that.
Yeah, so I can go. I was just thinking about it's not easy to say how to measure success, right? But the thing is that restorative practice is not something that you can see the result in an instant or visible, you know, because we're talking about human relations. So like behavior change, and that doesn't happen overnight. So but I will say though that us here in the organization here at AMOS, we try to have one person in each area that knows how to knows about restorative practices, knows how to lead a circle, and that's like the leader of the restorative practice in each area. It's not at the beginning, people might think, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of doing this? But once because we kind of like try to standardize and have a system where all of our co-workers and teams can use the restorative practice. So we had a restorative practice officer who is trained by our hero, Miguel Tello. People will be wondering, who is Miguel Tello? He's a person that trained all of us here at AMOS and changed our life. So this person he became, because he was a doctor, and he became our restorative practice officer. So he was in charge of training one person from each area in organization so that they can have restorative practice, or in this case circles, to deal with a specific conflicts, but at the same time have preventative circles, and they're a space where people can share things that are not working well, or successes, and people felt that they had a safe space and sense of belonging and cohesion. So in a way that at the beginning, usually people scale up the conflict, and they were looking for HR, they were looking for who is on the top, help me to deal with this or to fix this problem. But I think one of the metrics that you can use to measure success is how the teams are dealing with conflict, and how many of those conflicts are scaling up to the top teams, or in this case, the leadership, to resolve them or to transform them. So I don't know, Christy, if you want to add something, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's measurement is always a challenge, not just in restorative practices, but in trying to chart our impact in anything. But I do remember as someone who's a part of the leadership team and overseeing staff, that just trying to be able to say, how many times did I, use basically doing a survey of our managers, every certain amount of time, and saying, how often did I, in my weekly meetings with my team, utilize some kind of restorative practice? How many times did we do that, like in a monthly meeting? How many times did we do that as a leadership team? etc. I think for me, actually, as a manager, it was like very helpful because not just we have it as a part of an organizational culture, but then also being like, how being self-reflective, like how well did I actually do that? If we're kind of having that regular survey of people who are trying to facilitate that, just kind of reinforcing that I'm really living that out. Yeah, and I think what Gabriela said, measuring things like how often does not does it just not scale up, but the people internally are asking for, a circle versus some other kind of methodology to resolve a conflict. Maybe we're not talking about like big stats, but anecdotes and stories too. I think for us, when you have an example of a conflict or a situation and it ends up having a positive result, statistically it may not be huge, but I think the impact on a life basis, on a real personal basis, is very strong for people.
Yeah. Kathleen, you want to weigh in on that one? Go ahead.
Yeah, happy to. So I was in my role at LCJP in Longmont for 8 years, and I held a circle, was the last circle that I led before I left the team. And I asked, what impact has the restorative culture that we have organizationally had on your experience here? And to summarize the overall response that I heard from each staff person, it was, I feel like for the first time, I don't have to walk on eggshells at work. I know if something happens, whether I've experienced hurt or harm or caused it, we've got tools in place and agreement that we will use them, right? It's not just like knowing the tools, it's really committing to using them to address things with each other. And there's self-responsibility in that. So we've formed a shared foundation that encourages trust of self and other. And I think that was one of the greatest signs to me of success, right? That people could come and their nervous system could rest in terms of their relationships with each other, which was so essential because the work that they were doing with others in a restorative justice context was stressful and demanding and unpredictable at times. In other agencies that I've worked with, I would say there's progression and levels. So the first win that I often hear is, well, I'm not using this with my coworkers yet, but I'm starting to use it at home with my family. And I love hearing that because I know people are practicing where it's safe first. They're practicing in those places where like, okay, I kind of know what to predict with my family. And then the next level is these surprise moments where I hear like, I was having this conversation with my coworker, and then I realized that they're doing that stuff that you taught us. They were doing that reflection and they were asking these affective questions. And I was like, wow, that really works. I felt really heard in that conversation. I love hearing that. Then I start hearing, okay, I realize I need to have this restorative conversation. Like, I'm gearing up. I accept. I'm going to try to do this thing that's hard and new. And I think at that point, one of the most transformative things that I've heard as feedback is, I come into work with an organization and I learn there's maybe a couple people on the team that have sort of been ostracized or alienated from the group. There's this person always shows up in this way and it's difficult and we don't know what to do because they won't change. And then something happens where maybe that person is the circle keeper at a circle and they ask this amazing question. They come up with some question and everybody's like, wow, did you hear the question, wow, we had this question that so-and-so asked, and it just shifts the whole dynamic and perception, and also is a very healing moment for that person who has been excluded. All of a sudden, through the circle practice, they're being seen in a different light, and therefore they can see themselves differently. And that changes everything. You know, it may not change everything for forever, but it is the first step in a healing process. And I'll just say one more thing that I love to hear is when a group starts using restorative practices with each other, and then they begin using it in the community, which I think is what Christy and Gabriela have experienced as well. That there's this like, oh, I can use this everywhere. You know, oh, I'm going to actually now use the circle tool to establish agreements and what we're accountable to and for when I go and work with this community group. And there, you know, and so there's this natural growth of how the tools work and how successful they can be.
Ladies, I want to, this is some great counsel that you all are providing and examples. So we got a question, and it's a pretty heavy question. So I'm going to give it to the group here, and let's see if we can provide some healthy suggestions. So it's from Jennifer. She says, I currently work in healthcare. We are seeing a huge increase in workplace violence with a large amount of staff who are already experiencing compassion fatigue. Both have been very harmed. Some patients are not open to conversations and connections and are just verbally and often physically violent. In return, the clinical staff withdraw or return the same energy. At times, I cannot even get 2 words out to the patient without them cussing me out and demanding I leave the room. What insights can you provide on how to overcome a situation like this?
It is a very difficult setting that Jennifer is going through. And I think all of us at some point have been in a difficult setting. It doesn't matter if it's healthcare or whether other area. So it seems like there is a lot of work to do, but something that I think will help is you need everybody from the staffing, everybody involved, that they have the willingness to deal or to try to do something about this. Because if staff is dealing with this and the leadership is not trying to do something, they will not feel heard, and probably that will increase the, oh, we lost electricity. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let's hope that we don't cut off from the internet. I will try to open my windows. Maybe I can see.
Let's see if I open my window, I'm gonna see snow.
It's like
Real life. Yeah, we're not in the
Yes.
snow. We're in the heat and dryness here.
actually something floated, but coming back to that, I think that one, try to engage everybody, like all levels in the hospital or the healthcare unit that Jennifer is, and try to have everyone see this as a problem that is affecting them. Because if they don't feel affected, or if they don't feel that is a problem, then you will have different levels of engagement, right? And then 2, I don't know how what kind of patients, and yes, sometimes some patients are willing to and some others don't, but usually those behaviors it's because they want to be heard. It's because they want to be seen. It's because they want attention at the end. So one thing that has helped me as a physician is to empathize, is say like, can you still hear me?
Yes.
No? Okay. Have the courage of being vulnerable and say to the patient, like what like Christy was describing about, like not the patient to see you as somebody that has more power or it's like higher. It's just put at the same level and say, I know that you are not feeling comfortable. I know that you are in pain. I know that you're going through a difficult situation. I know that you have fear. I know that you are going to emotional pain. I don't know, something that you can express that you are that you feel identified with him or with her, the patient. And so I think that that will be like something that all of the staffing needs to learn on how to do that, to show yourself vulnerable.
Right. Go ahead, Christy.
So I haven't worked in healthcare directly, but I think that in restorative practices, and I'm just going to say I've seen Dr. Wu is really skilled at this as a leader in our organization, but I think trying to use curiosity and the situation that's being described, I mean, is extremely hard, like that. Just want to like recognize that and honor that there's so much going on in this question, but I think yes, hopefully being able to bring everybody together on a team or having leadership recognize the level of the issue, but even starting small with one coworker or two coworkers to be able to say, one, lift up any positive experiences amongst all the negative ones. That maybe I had a really good patient experience, and like just talk about that briefly to bring a little of the resilience into and remembering like why we're doing this. I think that can be really helpful. But also just like little tools, like creating like a little toolbox. What is working as a response to that animosity or conflict or people cussing you out. How to be able to say, okay, I have my little toolbox. How can I do things that help me to not respond with that same energy? Because that cycle of violence or the cycle of negative ways that we interact with each other, the more that I feel threatened, the most natural reaction is to respond with that same kind of energy. So yeah, I think just finding like those little tools, and it's very hard. That's a tough one.
I wholeheartedly agree with Christy and Gabriela's comments, including what a difficult situation is being described. And I just have a few thoughts to add about the importance about really getting on the same page and having a united front about how these scenarios are going to be handled. So it's not landing on just a couple people in these, in one room or another. There are these escalations and I'm left alone to try to handle it on my own. Then I would also say really doing anything you can to proactively set the expectation about the behavior that is permitted in the space and framing it as, we need this behavior from you so that we can serve you, so that we can help, so that we can show up here every day. And if you're not able to participate and be with us in this space in this way, then these are the consequences, and that's, I know that comes across as like, don't mess up, but then the consequences can also support giving people additional chances. It's not just like a you're out kind of mentality. one organization that I actually worked in years and years ago before I knew anything about restorative justice had a drop-in center for folks that were experiencing homelessness. And people would often come in, high or just on some sort of substance, and there would be an escalation. And the agreement from all of this staff is that everyone in the building would move towards the folks who were escalated. There would be just like a presence, so that the person who had the most relationship with whoever was in the conflict could be there as a presence, but be supported by the other staff and look for the opportunity to intervene and remind them of the agreements of how to be in this space. And then be with them, trying to go for that connection, so that there was a way for the people who were getting into that violent space to opt out. And then people would see it happen with each other. It wasn't happening in these kind of private, hidden spaces. There was a way for people to see how it worked that also shifted the collective expectation of how to be in the space.
Yeah, I would also offer this perspective. You're absolutely right with all of the COVID and just life that happens to folks. Whenever you see people, oh, we lost them. Whenever we see people, whatever they present, it's the old adage, you're seeing the tip of the iceberg. And rather than just responding to the tip of the iceberg, recognize that what's underneath it is what's causing that to present. So where possible, just try not to take it personal and recognize that's a pain that the individual is dealing with. Oh, we got Gabriela back. There we go. Perfect. We got another question. This one is a little lighter. The question is from Jonathan. He says, when introducing check-in circles in a work colleague context, I sometimes encounter bantering and joking around that to avoid going deeper. Do you have any guidance for helping people to trust each other enough to go deeper? What would you suggest? I don't know, Christy and Gabriela, if you heard that. So the question was trying to do a check-in in a work environment, and individuals will begin bantering and joking around to avoid going deeper into conversation or discussion. Do you have guidance for helping people to trust each other enough to go deeper?
Maybe I'll just make one comment that I think the fact that we can recognize that that's maybe a defense mechanism for some people, that they're maybe not comfortable yet with really being vulnerable, that they have some issues with that. I think it's important just to recognize it, but also not to like force it as well, because the reaction is probably going to be more negative than positive. I think to be able to also though call it out in a way that's respectful, because there may be some people who, that joking or bantering they are ready to go deeper, and the joking and bantering is kind of, I'm not feeling that this is a serious or a space where the people, in my circle, in my space, are like able to hear me if I was ready, but now it's maybe, I'm not. So yeah, I think that's a tough one. And I think there may be a need to address that with people individually, maybe not right in the moment, but in the space, after, to be able to, kind of say, hey, where's that coming from?
Yeah, great. Hey, we got Corey who has joined us.
I just wanted to pop in just for a super second. We have Miguel able to cue in if
Yeah.
we have some internet challenges, and Miguel is willing to jump in. So I'm just going to step back out. I just wanted to drop in to provide the invitation, as well as to just give a little bit of forewarning. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, let's bring him in, because two things I also wanted for us to. Miguel, there he is. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, Henry.
I don't know if you've
And
seen.
Gabriela and Christy. Wonderful to hear you. So inspired.
Look at that. Everybody saying hello. Somebody said you were the hero, Miguel.
I think the heroes are AMOS and Enlaces and Glasswing and so many other organizations that are doing amazing things.
I want to, because we're addressing an international audience, I want to talk about challenges of implementing restorative practice. And so, Christy and Gabriela, culturally, it's different for you. Just share a little bit where you're from and where you're working is a cultural difference, I believe, for you all. So what would you say to someone that may be going into a culture that is different than their native culture and trying to implement restorative practices? What were the opportunities and challenges of doing that? They can hear me okay.
Yeah, sorry. I think we're able to connect here. I'm on my phone now, but so I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, in the U.S., and have been living now in Nicaragua for about 13 years. And I think that coming into a space and living in a culture that is not my own, the first and like most important thing overall is going to be listening. And the humility, just as always maintaining an attitude and a perspective that even though I've learned a lot, even in the 13 years living here, like I've learned a lot about this culture. In some ways, people make comments all the time, you know, in terms of like, oh, I've been living here so long, like you're practically Nicaraguan, like this is your home. And while sometimes that feels like, oh, that's nice to hear, but I resist that internally a little bit all the time to just say, you know, I learn new things all the time. Details and subtleties and stories and cultural beliefs and, you know, things that impact the way that people, you know, live their daily lives or react to different situations differently than I do. And so that willingness to be a listener and to respect that someone else's perspective is not my own. It's different. It's not worse or better than, but it's something to be valued and to know that I will, you know, never know everything.
Okay, Gabriela.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We are connected with our phones, so
Yeah.
let's hope that the internet connection does not cut. So I'm Nicaraguan and I've lived in Nicaragua for the whole time, but I think I was just thinking about the question and maybe say that from rural to urban communities. So I think we have implemented circles and restorative practice in very rural settings with partners, receive visitors that can be partners. For example, Miguel. He has
Yeah, we're losing Gabriela. Miguel, are you able to?
Sure. Sure, I could
Visit,
have.
us here in the
go ahead.
campus, but also a community. So you can have different rounds coming into a circle. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, we got a really bad connection. Kathleen, let me turn to you because you have worked with a range of institutions. If you don't mind just sharing just kind of the different types of groups you work with and how you can still see that restorative practice can apply in those different agencies. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So in the past, I have worked with schools. I don't work with his schools as much. I'm now working much more with nonprofit organizations throughout the country, and also sometimes consulting with cities that want to build community restorative justice programs. And I want to touch back. I have some thoughts about the, adjusting to different cultures, but I will touch back to that question about the joking and bantering behavior, because I think that also ties into culture. In some workplaces, there's been compassion fatigue. There is hopelessness that I think Jennifer named, this sort of feeling of defeat or bitterness, resentment. And one of the sort of ways to off gas is also through joking and bantering. Like it's too tender to get deep and personal. And so I loved what Christy shared about, being curious about where that's coming from, what is the need behind that behavior. And then I would also say in terms of specifically that joking and bantering behavior, what can you do to be really explicit about setting the tone of the circle? Like even naming, sometimes we do more lighthearted questions. And today I want to offer something that's really close to my heart. And it feels really vulnerable for me to share this. And I'm really taking a risk to share this. And, not telling anyone what they have to do, but just naming what's true for me to try to invite people to meet me there. And then also, I think inviting those folks also to be the circle keepers, to lead the circle, to see where they might want to take it, what might they bring when they're in that role. Maybe they'll keep it really lighthearted. That's also fine. Sometimes we need that. And then at a certain point, I would say if it's really distracting from the circle practice, having that one-on-one restorative conversation with curiosity and exploring, what might it take for you to participate in the circle and share in a more personal or vulnerable way, and being open to whatever they say. Generally, when I'm thinking about the different cultures of various organizations I've worked with, my approach is very similar, right? So I know that my experience is very limited, not just by what I've done in the world, but who I am in the world. I am a white, cisgendered woman who has a lot of privilege. And when I enter into another space with folks that come from very different backgrounds, I acknowledge that I can't fully relate to everything that they're bringing to the table, what their story is, where they might have resistance or concern or reaction. And so what I can do is be upfront that I don't know what I don't know. I can validate, and coming back to Christy's beautiful comment about being curious and practicing humility, and then continue trying to be in connection, right? So using these tools of reflection, reframing, and looking for opportunities to maybe uncover the unforeseen possibilities, to be able to meet people in a different way and see if we can shift even slightly some of those things that might be creating resistance, while never asking anyone to be anything other than who they are.
Yeah, that's great. I'll go ahead. Miguel, were you gonna?
Yes, thank you, Henry. I'd just like to add a little bit to the conversation. So my work has taken me to Central America. And so I've been able to work in 6 of the Central American countries, and there are different cultures in each. I also come from a background of having been born and raised in Mexico. My father was Mexican, my mother from Nebraska, spending time in the United States and Brazil. And so I just like to add a couple of things. One is that I think that each culture has a different relationship to how confrontational conversation you can have. How comfortable do you feel really being able to say what you think, how you feel directly? And so that varies from culture to culture. Like in Central America, I would say that Guatemala has the least comfort with that kind of confrontation. As a matter of fact, a very common expression in Guatemala is "no tenga pena," don't be ashamed. They say that all the time. The other thing is that I think it also has to deal with our relationship to hierarchy. How do we see hierarchical relationships? So one thing that I've never been able to get used to in Costa Rica is that they call me Don Miguel. Don is an abbreviation for de origen noble, of noble origin. I just hate it. But I mean, anywhere I go, I am Don Miguel, and there's no getting around it. And so those kind of entrenched cultural characteristics have an impact on how you bring restorative practices. However, I have also seen that our common humanity brings us together, and that once you start modeling the circle space and people can see that you can bring your authentic self and how healthy and good that is, people very quickly start feeling comfortable with it and using it. So I've also trained Fundap in Guatemala, and they've brought circles to hundreds of teachers, students, families, despite being a culture that is very hierarchical and that also has this no tenga pena thing. And so I think that's the beauty of restorative practices, that it is so universal.
Good. Listen, time has flown by. So what I'd like to do now is to give each of you a minute to, as you think about this session, one thing that you'd like for people to walk away from this session. One thing I'd like the audience to take away from our discussion today is what? So if you complete that sentence for us. Kathleen, you want to go first, and then I'll come to Gabriela, and then Christy, and then Miguel. Since you joined us, I'll let you have a part in it too. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Yeah, thanks for that beautiful closing question, Henry. I think the one thing I'd like to share with the audience that I haven't spoken to yet is just the importance of restorative practice as a holistic practice. So for me, what that means is, how can I get back into my body? Sometimes restorative practice tends to be very verbal, and this is also can vary culturally. But for me to be well, to show up with all of these beautiful qualities and principles that we're talking about, with courageous vulnerability, humility, curiosity, I need to really be aware of what's happening somatically. So I would just encourage everybody, whether it's, breathing, meditation. For me, it's dance. I have a dance practice. I also practice Qigong, which is like Tai Chi. But that's my starting point always, is always to be accountable to myself and where I'm coming from when I step into that restorative space, and being really diligent about attending to that first, so that I know I'm coming with a grounded system and an open heart.
Great. Gabriela, 1 minute.
Yes, I will try to be fast. My interconnection is not good, so I don't have a video. So I will talk from my own experience. So one thing I will like to share with the people that it's with us today is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of implement the restorative practice, because I was afraid at the beginning. So don't be afraid, and then trust that it works. Trust that it has a beautiful result. So that's what I want to have people go with today.
Christy, go ahead.
I'm just going to go back to something that Kathleen said, actually. So I think that when we're talking about dignity in the workplace and implementing restorative practices for a work environment, we're integral human beings, but going from being an organization or a workplace that maybe doesn't have restorative practices, and once you learn about them and you get exposed to it, I feel like you want to go from 0 to 100 right away. But I think that seeing those
Oh, I lost her. Miguel, why don't you go ahead and we'll see if we're able to get her back.
Sure. So I would close with something that I learned from Kay Pranis, who taught me the art of circle keeping, and that is to believe in the circle process, and to believe that the circle process will elicit the best out of each person. And that's what restorative practices does. When we have that safe space where we can be authentic, we can elicit the best out of people, even when there are great crying needs or rage, etc. Those things can be calmed down. We can bring our authentic selves and elicit the best in each one as part of the community.
That's great. All right. Well, one thing I'd like for the audience to take away from we got Christy back. Christy, I want to let you finish your statement.
I don't know what you heard, but yeah, I think I saw it in the chat, but really it was just that it's a process and that it's not going to happen overnight.
That's great. And I want to offer one other suggestion too, the question of laughing and bantering. Sometimes a way of dealing with that is talking, if there's a particular person that's doing that, pulling them to the side before you go in and say, you know what, you're a leader in this group, and I know if you take this seriously, others will too. And maybe giving them the question up front so they have time to think about it in advance is another way of helping to address that. And then just make sure you express appreciation to them if they do that in the session afterwards. So the other thing I'd like for the audience to take away is an appreciation for the amazing work our panelists are doing to advance restorative practice in very diverse working and cultural environments. Second is to take away confidence to know you also are, or you can make a difference with restorative practices. If you are contemplating joining the global effort to make restorative practice the normal way people engage, regardless of the communities that they exist in. So we want to thank all of you for being here. We had close to 200 people, which is awesome. We also want to thank our sponsor for their support, Design Learning, for their generous contributions. We want you to also remember to complete your survey right after this session. Also check out our on-demand sessions, community exhibitor booths, and research poster sessions located in your attendee hub. Please stay connected and continue your conversation by joining other events, including discussion and networking small groups, art and expression conversations, and other panel discussions that will take place today. Our next session that's coming up is Reimagining Schools, Restorative Responses to Adversity. Thanks so much for being here.